Genesis chapter 50. Jacob is buried in Canaan, and Joseph is buried in Egypt. This is an important chapter since it closes out Genesis. Also, wanted to say to everyone that we will stop with this week, and then we'll not resume until August. And then when we do so, what we're going to do is just carry right on into Exodus. If you'll take a look at that first chapter, you'll see it just starts with and. There's no break between Genesis 50 and chapter 1 of Exodus. Chapter 50, verse 1. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, so the physicians embalmed Israel. Now 40 days were required for it, for such is a period required for embalming, and the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. Jacob gets embalmed, but not by the special members of the Egyptian priestly class. They're caste, as they're known. Physicians handled this for Joseph, and they were different from the other group, and they would not need to follow the typical religious procedure, which required 40 days, and the total time that they mourned for him was 70 days, which is 10 weeks. And it shows us in that last verse there, then the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. That means they mourned for him. That the Egyptians held Jacob in very high honor and respect, and not just because he was Joseph's father, Joseph's number 2 in the kingdom, of course, but also because he was an elderly man and viewed as a very honorable man. Why did Joseph command the physicians to embalm his father, considering this is not how Semitic people like Jacob's clan buried their dead? Joseph, first of all, didn't worship the Egyptian gods. We know that. So he wanted his father embalmed without the religious ceremonies. Okay, that's one part. But why did he have him embalmed at all? As you see in red there on the screen, Joseph needed to have his father's body prepared for a 200-mile journey up to Mamre in Canaan. That's through a desert, hot desert. I think that's enough said. Verse 4. When the days of mourning for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am about to die. In my grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, and then I'll return. Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. Okay. Joseph asked Pharaoh's staff members to petition him to approve of Joseph's going up to Canaan to bury his father, instead of asking Pharaoh himself. Why? Well, there were a few reasons for him asking this. First, due to his being in mourning, Joseph would not have wanted to go up before Pharaoh. He couldn't have, because he was unshaven and unkempt, which was in keeping with the custom. They went for a period of time. They didn't shave, they didn't dress, they didn't clean, just as a part of the honoring of the passing dead family member. Also, this may not have been the same Pharaoh that Joseph started with, because some years have gone by now, we don't know, and so the relationship between them might have been different. It's a possibility that I've found in my research for the class, but it's not likely, my personal opinion. Joseph served as Pharaoh's right-hand man. So here's a third reason why he may have had to do what he did. So if he just simply went up with his brothers in the casket, Pharaoh may have thought that he was making a jailbreak and not planning to come back. To avoid any misunderstanding, Joseph made sure to get permission before departing. Verse 7. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. And all the household of Joseph and his brothers and his father's household, they left only their little ones and their flocks and their herds in the land of Goshen. There also went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. So, we have a lot of people going up on this trip. Who were the participants in this trip to the land of Canaan? Well, let's look at, I've broken it down for us here. We have Pharaoh's administrative staff. We have many ranking Egyptian elders or leaders. Joseph and his household, that meant along with his brothers and many other family members, and also a contingent of military chariots and horsemen. Now, they only left enough people of Jacob's clan behind in Egypt in order to take care of their livestock and run the farms. Now, why have a large military contingent accompany the Israelites? Pharaoh himself didn't go, as we see from the list, but he wanted to make sure that Joseph came back after burying his father. They were going into Canaanite territory, and so a strong guard was needed to keep the peace. Also, the route they followed took them up the east side of the Jordan past the Dead Sea, rather than going the coastal route, the Mediterranean route, that would have taken them through Philistine territory, which was politically risky. Pharaoh and his family and other people who were ruling Egypt were Semites, or I like to say Shemites, to make it clear which of Noah's sons we're talking about. And the Philistines were Canaanites, and so it was politically risky to go that way. They went a longer route up along one of the so-called King's Highways, going all the way up to Haran and then around back southeast down to Babylon if you wanted to go that far. And so that got them over near to where they needed to be, but which was on the west side. Verse 10, when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and sorrowful lamentation. And he observed 7 days mourning for his father. Now when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians." Therefore it was named Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. This phrase, the threshing floor of Atad, now it was on the east side of the Jordan, they haven't crossed. The term literally means the buckthorn floor. Okay, buckthorn was a thorny bush common in that area, and a threshing area for grain had been set up there, and it was probably a wide area because this was a large group of people, and could have been a meadow. We'll see why. It also could hold this large company, and the whole group, this is Egyptians and Joseph and all the other brothers and their family, spent 7 days mourning there. The Canaanites who witnessed all this, they were watching from higher ground, looking down, named the spot Abel Mizraim, the place of Egypt's mourning. As we know, Mizraim is the actual name for Egypt, and was named after Mizraim, who founded the country, who was a son of Ham. Now, there's a play on words here that we don't get in English. Abel is Canaanite for meadow, while Ebel is the Egyptian word for mourning. So you could say that they called it the Egyptian meadow of mourning. Verse 12, thus his sons did for him as he had charged them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre. This is which Abraham had bought along with the field for a burial site from Ephron the Hittite. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. The Israelites went up by themselves to Mamre, and the Egyptians stayed down on the other side of the river. And then after this, they all packed up and went back to Egypt. Verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him?" So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, "Your father charged us before he died, saying, 'You shall say to Joseph, please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for what they did to you was wrong. Now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him." This phrase, "saw that their father was dead," well, they knew that. This was meaning that his father was now buried, it's official, it's over, and they're going back to Egypt. And so now they're worried that he's going to take revenge on them for what they had done to him many years before. What the brothers are doing here is an example of projection, in which the brothers were projecting onto Joseph what they would do if they were in his position. Now, Joseph doesn't feel this way at all towards him. These brothers were a rough bunch. We've seen that in all the chapters we've gone through, what they've done, their unforgiving behavior, retaliatory behavior, very revengeful. And they just thought that Joseph would do what they would do if they were in his position. And we see, though, that they just don't understand Joseph. So, what do the brothers do? They choose a spokesman, probably Benjamin. He was the one brother who wasn't guilty of all this, since he was Joseph's whole brother, not half-brother. And they ask him to take their request for forgiveness to Joseph, using the argument that their father had told them to do this. Now, there's no record of Jacob having told them this, but it's possible that he had said this. And Joseph breaks into tears upon hearing this request. It just breaks his heart at how these guys just keep going on and on with this. Verse 18. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we're your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. The brothers now show up before him, and they fall down. They begin bowing down to him and saying that they'd be his servants. This is yet another time where we see his brothers fulfilling the prophecy that Joseph had with that dream way, way back years ago. Joseph's not going to put up with this, and explains that he is not in the place of God to pass judgment upon them. And he does acknowledge that they had meant him harm, but God allowed it to happen so that Jacob and his clan could be saved from the famine, and even more importantly, from becoming polluted by the Canaanites and their hideous religious beliefs and practices. He also encourages them by saying that he'll take care of them and their families, including descendants. They simply did not understand Joseph's way of thinking. All his life, he stayed faithful to the Lord, and he understood that God had always been in charge of his life. I think indirectly we see that his brothers don't share this faith that he had. Now, some of you will remember the life of Joseph is the foundation of Dr. Tony Evans' video series on detours. Detours he used referring to the unexpected and often unwelcome changes in our lives that happen to us from time to time. We should try to learn from the example of Joseph, to recognize and remember that such detours in our lives happen for a purpose. They're not random. God is working on us to become more and more like Christ Jesus. And when such things happen, we should respond by just asking God, okay, this is something happening. I didn't want it. I don't like it, but what do you want me to learn from it? Now, This coronavirus is a big detour for most of us. So what should we learn from it? One, God is still in charge. As the saying goes, there's no panic in heaven. God knew this was going to happen before the beginning of time, as the Bible says. And we might be seeing here that the more people are going digital, and sermons and lessons like this one are being put up on YouTube and in other vehicles, more use of email and all the other messages and ways of delivery, Facebook and so forth, that it's very likely that more people are hearing the gospel now than before. Verse 22. Now Joseph stayed in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons. Also the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph spent the rest of his life in Egypt. Just look at some of the time frame here. He lived 110 years, 54 of those years after his father died. He lived long enough to see his great-great-grandsons. His two sons were born before he was 37, and he could have had grandsons when he was in his 50s, and great-grandsons in his 70s, and great-great-grandsons at around 100. So he lived a very long time and saw already multiple generations projecting forward in the new nation of Israel. He saw this also in the families of his brothers as well, as time went on and more new generations were being born. Verse 24. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones from here. So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. Even though Joseph's life had ended very well in Egypt, he always thought of it as a foreign land and planned to return to Canaan, even if it was many years after his death. He never forgot his roots as a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and a believer in the true God. Now it says his brothers. Really? Since Joseph, the second youngest of Jacob's sons, was 110, it is unlikely that any of his brothers, except maybe Benjamin, who would be younger than him by a little bit, but still really old himself, were still alive. They'd all passed away. So this is a reference to his nephews and great-nephews, in other words, his next of kin in this new nation of Israel. He promises again that God will surely take care of them, and he then makes them promise to bury his bones in Canaan. Now, that is recorded in Joshua chapter 24, if you want to take a look there. He was buried in the plot of land purchased by Jacob at Shechem, and that's in the territory of Ephraim. So he's going to be buried someday in the future in the land, the territory given to his son Ephraim. We see that Joseph was embalmed and placed in a wooden coffin, not a sarcophagus, which was what high-ranking Egyptians were buried in. The sarcophagus was oftentimes, you may have seen on Discovery Channel and other such venues, that they were big stone coffin-like things with the lid molded somewhat in the idealized view of what the person inside looked like. He was in a wooden coffin. Some point out that it was probably made out of local sycamore wood. And it would be kept in a building. It wouldn't have been put in the ground because he wasn't buried there, where it would then serve as a reminder to all the descendants of Jacob afterwards that Egypt was not their final home, but that God would eventually take them back to Canaan. Now, let's look at this for a second. For over 3 centuries, the Israelites would keep this coffin as a reminder that they were not Egyptians and that Egypt was not their true home. Let's take a look now back over the book of Genesis. In Genesis 1:1, we have, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And here in chapter 50, verse 26, so Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. Genesis begins with the creation of the heavens and the earth and ends with a coffin in Egypt. And in between, what we see is how sin came into the world, into creation, and how it played out in the lives of everyone since then, right down to the death of Joseph, and as we know, right on down to our time. And as such, we see that there's an emphasis on death that characterizes Genesis. It's also interesting to reflect that this book, in terms of doing a historical study, we've now covered over 1/3 of the history of the entire world up until now. And between Genesis and 50 and Exodus 2, over 350 years will pass before the story of God's chosen people is taken up again. Now, what we're going to find is after a new biblical character reaches the age of 80, and about 430 years after the Israelites first went down to Egypt, do they finally leave Egypt. And we're going to look at this person that comes on the scene. That's a long period of time of which we hear nothing. And put it in perspective, okay, 430 years ago from now in our time, 2020, would be 1590 AD. That would have been before the Pilgrims came over, before the Puritans, before all of that we were taught in American history, when things really began to get going up in New England. Now, our next meeting will be in August when we start with Exodus. So I will see you, so to speak, then, and I hope literally within the next few weeks we might be able to see each other physically, as it may open up that the church is open again and we can actually see one another. I, for one, am very much starved for that. I want to see you guys again. So take care, and we'll see you soon.